Hi everyone, this is Lindsay from Sea Salt and Samphire, and in this video I'm going to show you how I personally make spacers for my shadow boxes. As an example file, we're going to use the snowman shadow box that we designed together in my other video in Cricut Design Space. So if you want to see that video and you haven't already seen it, then I'll put a link below. Now I make my spacers from foam board. You can use corrugated cardboard, but foam board is better really because it's definitely acid free, whereas if you use corrugated cardboard you can't guarantee that it's not going to react with the paper in your shadow box at some point. So to start with, this shadow box is going to need 5 layers or 5 spacers. And we'll just start with the first one. Now you're going to need quite a sturdy ruler, a pencil. I use a scalpel, but you can use a craft knife instead, and obviously a cutting mat so you don't ruin your table. So to start with, what we're going to do is I've measured out my frame that I'm going to put my shadow box in, and I know it's 20 centimetres by 20 centimetres, which is roughly 8 inches square. And I'm just measuring out the outer sides of my first spacer, so I'm marking it at 20 and 20. I should say it's the internal size, so that obviously your spacers fit inside your frame. So I'm just marking these out now, and then after that we'll actually mark the inner square of the spacer, because what you're going to end up with is kind of like a square with a large aperture inside. I actually make the width of my spacers about 7mm. I have tried it at 5 and it does work, but set the extra couple of millimetres actually makes it a little more sturdy. So I'm just right, I finished my square, so now I'm measuring it out 7mm, sorry, from the edge of this particular line, and then I'll do that all the way round and join the dots up with the ruler. Unfortunately, this is the really boring bit of shadow boxes because it's all manual. It's not something you can really do on a machine. I think the newer silhouette machines, you can actually get a 3mm depth back blade, which is what my foam board is. This one's 3mm deep, but I'm not confident that it'll cut through it, because as you'll see in a minute, foam board has a paper layer on top, and then it has like the foam layer in between, and then another paper layer at the bottom, so it's almost like a sandwich. So I think that a cutting machine would probably have issues cutting through that, even with a deep blade. I've never tried. Maybe I'll give it a go and see if it works, because it would save a lot of time. But actually, I mean, the first spacer is the one you have to spend the time on, but once you've got the first one, you can actually use it as a template to draw out the others on the so the others are actually quicker to do. But I'm just joining up my lines now, so I've got a guide to cut with. Incidentally, you'll probably notice if you're a hand cutter that I've got quite a small blade on my my scalpel. This is a 15A blade, and I wouldn't actually use it for cutting shadow boxes, but I've run out of my longer blades, so I just had to suffer really. So when I cut into the foam board, as I said, it's sort of a sandwich really. The first cut you do, you have to make sure that you line your ruler up exactly next to where you want to cut, and press the blade next to the ruler so that you don't go off kilter. But you make sure that you just cut through the top paper layer with the first cut, and then go back and draw it through the foam and hopefully the bottom layer as well. Because if you try and do it all in one go, you'll get sort of a jagged line, and it's quite difficult to cut. So it's much better to do sort of a shallow first cut first, and it acts as a guide actually. So after you've done that first cut, you can't really go wrong when you're cutting through the foam. I say that, I have actually gone wrong before. I had to reshoot part of this video for that very reason. So yeah, it's just a matter of just being careful on the first spacer, because then you can use it as a good template for the rest of them. The other thing I should have mentioned is we're actually going to add lights to the back of our shadow box, because it's a light up shadow box. So you'll also need some micro LED lights. I'll add a link to the ones that I buy, but obviously you have to bear in mind it will be a UK site, but I'm sure you know the kind I mean. I think they're called rice lights in the US, and I think they've got 20 LEDs on them, but you'll see that nearer the end of the video. And I'll show you how to actually fix them to the spacers so that you can put them in the back of your shadow box. Right, so here where I've cut through, it hasn't gone all the way through in the corners on the reverse side, and you'll just find that it's just purely because of the angle of the blade of the knife really. So I'm just carefully going over and cutting through that last little bit of the layer. There's another little bit there as well, needed cutting through. And so I'm just going to cut the excess off now. Now you'll notice that I'm actually cutting the middle out first before I'm cutting the outer edge. This is because it keeps the spacer stable. If you cut the outer edge first and then cut the middle piece out, it wouldn't be as stable, and it can rip and go wrong. So as much stability as you can give it really is better. In fact, what I probably should have done is actually left the middle in while I was cutting the outer as well, because that would have kept it even more stable. But you know me, I like to do things a bit different. Okay, so that is our first spacer, and we've only got another 4 to go. I'm just going to show you how to use this one as a template for the next one, and then I won't bore you with the other 3. I'll just skip ahead. But you kind of get the idea. So if you place your next piece of foam board down, and then try and hold it, line it up and try and hold it still as you can, and then basically all you need to do is mark around the outer edges, and also a couple of marks on each corner in the inner corners as well. So it just saves all the measuring and drawing of lines. And yes, it will be very slightly thicker than the first one, but it doesn't really matter too much, because you still won't be able to see the edges of it in the frame once all the paper layers are in. So now it's just a case of cutting it out. It definitely is worth taking time to line up the ruler correctly, because I mean you'll find that foam board isn't exactly a cheap item. With good reason. It's really useful stuff actually. You can use it for all sorts of things, like making 3D models of buildings and all kinds of stuff. You can use it for mounting pictures and things on. I'm a massive foam board fan. So I'm just cutting the inner portion out again. I am aware this is quite boring to watch. I hate watching it back myself, but it's got to be done. Now some people, I should say that some people, they don't make a full square spacer. for their shadow boxes. They actually just use 4 strips, which would conserve foam board and does make it slightly more economical. But I tried that when I first started doing shadow boxes about 6 years ago now, and I was never confident that it was going to stay properly in the frame, and especially as I was actually selling my pieces and they were sort of commissioned artwork, I needed to come up with a way of doing it that I could trust that it was going to stay where it was meant to in the frame. So that's why I came up with this method. If you look online, well, actually, I couldn't find many tutorials online. This is why I decided to do this one. If you look online and try and find a tutorial how to make a shadow box, a lot of them will just do the single strips and then actually glue those strips to the frame, which is how I did it when I first started. But as I said, I wasn't particularly confident in it. So, and I found this pretty much works most times. The only time it won't work is if you've made a slight boo-boo with your measurements and it's a bit too small for the frame or too small for the actual paper layers, in which case you can actually stick the paper layers to each spacer to hold it in place. But there you go, that's your one used where I've used a template to create it. So that's those 2. Ta-da! I've done all 5 now. And you can see the rice lights or micro LED lights I've got here. So they're kind of LEDs on a copper wire, and they're perfect really, because the battery pack is actually quite a small battery pack as well, so it's not too heavy. Some of them you get, you have to have full size AA batteries in. I think there's like 3 batteries, so it can be a bit clunky. Whereas this one you can easily tuck it behind the frame when you're done. In fact, if you're hanging the frame up, these ones are ideal as well because they're not very heavy, and you can tape them to the back of your shadow box frame. But basically what you need to do is wind the copper wire with the lights on around one of the spacers, but you need to make sure that you get your LEDs on the inner part of it. Can you see there? So that all the lights are kind of shining into the box. I'm just going to wind this up because it's driving me mad trying to thread it through. There we go, that's better. Right, and continue wrapping now. Okay, I think I'm going to keep wrapping, and I might speed this up in the edit, because really, who wants to see someone wrapping 20 lights around a frame in normal speed? Obviously this does take a bit of time as well. I usually do this bit when I'm sitting in front of the TV or something. In fact, I usually cut out my spacers while I'm sitting in front of the telly as well, because it's the most boring bit to me. Right, there we go, super speed. Wish I could do it that quickly in real life. Right, you might find that they kind of overlap a bit really, and you sort of go round again. It really doesn't matter, as long as you've got the lights or the LEDs on the inside, it's fine. And usually you'll find there's an LED right at the end of the copper wire, and you can just sort of just squidge it onto the spacer. Now if you've got different type of lights to this, you can sort of sellotape them to the spacer, but I find this way you know that they're not going to come off. It's pretty robust. So the wire bit at the end, where it's got like the plastic around it, that's the bit that's going to be outside of your frame in the end. There we go, there's the lights. Okay, so now we've got everything prepared, we're ready to assemble our shadow box. So normally you'd put the glass in now first, but because I don't want the glare from the light, the studio lights, on the glass, so I can show you properly, I'm not going to put the glass in, but you'd put the glass in first before you put the mount layer in, and then you put your first spacer in behind the mount layer. Just making sure it lines up okay, and then you put your first snowflake layer in, or whichever is your first layer, depending on what shadow box you've chosen to do. I should have said you'll change the amount of spacers you need depending on what shadow box file you've used, but the majority of mine are about 5 or 6 spacers, I think. And there is a slight bit of play in this particular shadow box frame that I use, so I can actually squeeze 6 spacers in if I need to. And then that's the final snow layer. And basically, it's basically layer spacer, layer spacer. And then that's the last normal spacer going in. And then we've got our moon and stars layer on top of that. And then this is where you'll put in your spacer layer that's got the lights wrapped around it. Okay, need to poke that through. There we go. Now then the background layer goes on top, and I've actually folded over the corner. I mean, you could cut that off, but it's easier just to fold it. And then the back of the frame, I actually have cut a little triangle out on the right hand side, you can see there, just so it lets the lead of the lights out. And then you just push your tabs down, or you can tape it with framing tape, however your box is put together. And then you could, as I said, stick the switch on the back with tape or something if you're hanging it on the wall, but I just tuck mine behind and then on the shelf. And then you turn the lights on, and you probably can't see anything because of the studio lights. There we go, I'll turn them off. There we go, that's better. And that's it. If you've got any questions, you know where to find me. So ask away, and I'll see you in the next video.